The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Lillian Blackwell stood at the edge of her failing ranch, the telegram clutched in her trembling hand announcing the death of her husband, Samuel, at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Her whole world had crumbled in the space of a few printed words, leaving her alone to manage their struggling homestead in the unforgiving terrain of eastern Colorado Territory in 1863. "Mrs. Blackwell?" The deep voice startled her. Lillian turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, his cowboy hat tipped respectfully. "Mr. Norwood," she replied, recognizing Owen Norwood, a cattle driver who occasionally passed through the area. "I'm afraid I'm not in a state for visitors." He dismounted from his horse, approaching carefully. "I heard about Samuel. I'm sorry for your loss, madam." His voice was low, genuine. "I also heard about the troubles you've been having with the Harmon gang. They've been pressing you to sell, haven't they?" Lillian stiffened, wondering how much this man knew about her predicament. Since Samuel left for war, Luther Harmon and his men had been gradually increasing pressure on her to sell the ranch at a fraction of its worth. With Samuel gone forever, she knew they would only grow bolder. "My husband believed in this land," she said firmly. "I won't dishonor his memory by giving it up." Owen stepped closer, and in the fading light, she could see his weathered face, kind eyes that had seen their share of hardship. "Then let me fight for you now," he said simply. Lillian felt a flash of indignation. "I don't need charity, Mr. Norwood." "It's not charity I'm offering," he replied. "I need work and a place to stay. You need someone who knows cattle and can keep the Harmons at bay. It's an arrangement that benefits us both." As night fell over the Colorado plains, Lillian considered his offer, unaware that this chance encounter would change the course of her life forever. The following morning, Lillian awoke before dawn, as was her custom since Samuel had departed for the war. The weight of her grief felt heavier in these quiet moments, but she forced herself to rise. The ranch would not run itself. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, stopping short when she found Owen already there, stoking the stove fire. "Hope you don't mind," he said, straightening up. "Thought I'd get an early start." "Not at all," she replied, somewhat discomfited by his presence. After their conversation the previous night, she had reluctantly agreed to take him on as a ranch hand. With winter approaching and the herd needing attention, she had little choice. Still, having a man in her home again, one who wasn't Samuel, felt strange. "Coffee," he offered, gesturing to the pot he'd prepared. She nodded, grateful for the small kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Norwood." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If I'm to work here, there's no need for formalities." As they sipped their coffee, Lillian outlined the most pressing tasks: mending the north fence line, checking on the cattle, and preparing for the coming cold season. Owen listened attentively, asking questions that revealed his experience. "And the Harmons?" he inquired finally. "When might we expect them?" "They typically send one of their men every couple of weeks," she replied. "It's been 10 days since their last visit, so I imagine we'll be seeing them soon." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "I understand Luther Harmon has been buying up all the land between here and Willow Creek. Your ranch is the last piece he needs for whatever he's planning." "That's right. The railroad's coming through, and he wants to control the water rights," Lillian explained. "Samuel and I refused to sell, and now—" Her voice trailed off. "Now they think you'll be easy to intimidate," Owen finished. His eyes hardened. "They're mistaken." True to her prediction, 2 of Harmon's men rode onto the property that afternoon while Lillian was hanging laundry. She recognized them: Jeb Fletcher and Tom Rollins, both hired guns with reputations for cruelty. "Afternoon, Mrs. Blackwell," Fletcher called out with mock politeness. "Mr. Harmon sends his condolences on your loss." His tone made it clear the sentiment was anything but genuine. "Please give Mr. Harmon my thanks," Lillian replied stiffly, "and tell him my answer remains the same." Fletcher's false smile vanished. "Now, Mrs. Blackwell, be reasonable." A woman alone can't manage a spread like this. Mr. Harmon's offer is generous, all things considered. She's not alone. Owen's voice rang out as he emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. He walked unhurriedly to stand beside Lillian. And Mr. Harmon's offer isn't worth considering. The two riders exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this development. And who might you be? Rollins demanded. Owen Norwood. I'm working this ranch now. Fletcher sneered. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. This is between Mrs. Blackwell and Mr. Harmon. Actually, Owen replied evenly, Mrs. Blackwell has put me in charge of dealing with unwanted visitors. So, I suggest you deliver her message and be on your way. The tension in the air was palpable. Lillian could see Fletcher's hand hovering near his pistol, and her heart raced. But something in Owen's stance, the quiet confidence, the unspoken threat gave the men pause. We'll be back, Fletcher warned, turning his horse. Mr. Harmon won't take kindly to interference. I'm counting on it, Owen replied. As they rode away, Lillian released the breath she'd been holding. That was dangerous, she said. Owen shrugged. Men like that understand only one thing, that someone's willing to stand up to them. But you're right, they'll be back and with more men next time. Why are you doing this? Lillian asked suddenly. You hardly know me or this ranch. It's not your fight. Owen was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the riders had disappeared. I spent 4 years fighting in the Mexican War, he finally said. Saw good men die for causes they believed in. Your husband fought for what he believed in too. The least I can do is help protect what he left behind. His words stirred something in Lillian, gratitude, yes, but also a connection she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said softly. Owen just nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he turned back to his work, leaving Lillian with the unsettling realization that for the first time since receiving news of Samuel's death, she didn't feel quite so alone. The days quickly fell into a rhythm. Owen rose before dawn, tended to the horses and livestock, and worked tirelessly on repairs around the ranch. Lillian managed the household and garden, kept the accounts, and helped with the cattle when needed. They worked well together, their efforts complementing each other in ways that made the burden of running the ranch lighter for them both. In the evenings, they would share simple meals at the kitchen table, their conversations gradually expanding beyond the day's tasks. Lillian learned that Owen had drifted through much of the West since returning from the Mexican War, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs on ranches. He spoke little of his family, mentioning only a sister back east whom he hadn't seen in years. What about you? He asked one night as they sat by the fire. How did you and Samuel come to settle here? Lillian smiled at the memory. Samuel had a vision. He believed this land could be something special. We came out here from Missouri in '58, just after we were married. I was 20, he was 24, and we were both so full of dreams. She gazed into the flames. The first winter was brutal. I wanted to go back, but Samuel insisted we give it another season. By the next autumn, we'd built this house and had a small herd started. He sounds like a determined man, Owen observed. He was, Lillian agreed. When the war broke out, I begged him not to go. We had built so much here, and the Confederacy's cause wasn't ours. But he felt it was his duty. Her voice grew quiet. The last thing he said was that he'd return to me, and we'd grow old together on this land. Owen was silent, respectful of her grief. After a moment, he said, Then we'll make sure this ranch survives. For him. The simple promise warmed her more than the fire. As October gave way to November, the weather turned sharply colder. They worked together to prepare the ranch for winter, repairing outbuildings, storing supplies, and ensuring the cattle had sheltered areas. The Harmons had not returned, which Owen found suspicious. They're planning something, he said one evening as they ate supper. Luther Harmon isn't the type to give up easily. Perhaps they've moved on to easier targets, Lillian suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Owen shook his head. Your land is too valuable, especially with the railroad coming. We should be prepared. The next morning, Owen rode into town for supplies and to gather information. The small settlement of Cedar Ridge, about 10 miles from the ranch, served as the local trading post and mail stop for the scattered homesteads in the area. When he returned that afternoon, his expression was grim. Harmon's been busy, he reported as he unloaded the supplies. He's brought in more men, at least 6 that I could count. They're staying at the saloon in town. And there's talk that he's secured a contract with a railroad company, contingent on controlling the water rights in this valley. Lillian's heart sank. So the pressure will only increase. Yes, Owen agreed. But there's something else. I spoke with Judge Wilson while I was in town. He confirmed that your deed is solid and Harmon can't legally force you out. The judge also mentioned that he's received complaints from other ranchers about Harmon's tactics. He's watching the situation closely. This was a small comfort, but Lillian knew that out here, the law often arrived too late to prevent trouble. What do you suggest we do? We prepare, Owen said firmly. And we don't face this alone. I've invited some neighbors for a meeting tomorrow, the Petersons, old Jim Fitzgerald, and the Martinez family. All of them have had run-ins with Harmon. Together, we might stand a better chance. The following day, the neighbors gathered in Lillian's kitchen. Despite their varied backgrounds and circumstances, they shared a common concern: Luther Harmon's growing influence and aggressive tactics. Maria Martinez, whose family had ranched in the area since before it was U.S. territory, spoke passionately about the need for unity. My father always said that a single twig breaks, but the bundle remains strong, she said in her accented English. Harmon picks us off one by one because we let him. Jim Fitzgerald, a grizzled former trapper who now ran a small sheep operation, nodded in agreement. Been saying that for years. We should have banded together long ago. The meeting resulted in a plan. They would establish a patrol system, ensuring no homestead was left undefended. If Harmon's men threatened any of them, the others would respond quickly. They would also send documentation of Harmon's intimidation tactics to both the territorial governor and the military commander at Fort Lyon. As the neighbors departed, each seemed more hopeful than when they had arrived. Lillian felt a surge of determination. Perhaps with this alliance, they could indeed stand against Harmon. That night, as she prepared for bed, she heard a noise from outside. Cautiously approaching the window, she saw Owen sitting on the porch steps, his profile illuminated by moonlight. Without fully understanding why, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked, sitting beside him. He glanced at her, a hint of surprise in his eyes at her presence. "Just thinking," he replied. "Nights like this remind me of camp during the war, quiet, but with a feeling that something's coming." Lillian nodded, understanding the sentiment. "I've felt that way since Samuel left," she admitted. Always waiting for the next challenge. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the vast canopy of stars stretching above them. "You organized the neighbors well today," she said finally. "They respect you." Owen shrugged. "They just needed someone to speak up first. People generally want to do right, they just need a push sometimes." "Is that why you stopped to help me? A push to do right?" The question hung between them, more personal than their previous conversations. "Partly," he acknowledged, "but there was more to it." He turned to look at her directly. "When I first rode by and saw you standing there with that telegram, I recognized the look on your face. It was the same one I saw in the mirror after Mexico. The world falls apart, but somehow you're still standing, wondering how that's possible." Lillian felt tears gathering in her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. It was the most accurate description of her grief she had heard. "I'm sorry," Owen said quickly, noticing her reaction. "I didn't mean to, no," she interrupted, wiping at her eyes.
You're right.
That's exactly how it feels. Like everything is broken, but somehow I'm expected to continue. Owen hesitated, then gently placed his hand over hers where it rested on the wooden step. You're doing more than continuing, Lillian. You're fighting. For your home. For Samuel's memory. That takes real courage. The touch of his hand was warm and steady, and for a brief moment, Lillian allowed herself to draw comfort from it. But then, abruptly aware of the impropriety, she withdrew her hand and stood. Thank you for your kind words, she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. We should both get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. As she walked back to the house, she could feel his eyes on her, and with it, a confusing mixture of emotions she wasn't ready to examine. The winter settled in with a vengeance, bringing bitter cold and heavy snowfall that blanketed the Colorado landscape. Life on the ranch became a daily struggle against the elements, but the shared hardship seemed to strengthen the bond between Lillian and Owen. They worked side by side to keep the cattle fed and sheltered, to maintain the house against the fierce winter winds, and to remain vigilant against any move from Harmon. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories that Lillian found difficult to bear. Samuel had loved the holiday, always ensuring they had a small tree decorated with handmade ornaments and a special dinner, no matter how lean times were. This would be her first Christmas without him. Sensing her melancholy, Owen suggested they join the community gathering in Cedar Ridge on Christmas Eve. The whole town comes together at the church, he explained. There's singing, food, and fellowship. Might do us both good to be around others. Lillian hesitated, reluctant to face the pitying looks she was sure to receive as the new widow. But the alternative, sitting alone in the house with her memories, seemed worse. Very well, she agreed. But we can't stay long. The cattle will need checking early the next morning. On Christmas Eve, they hitched the wagon and made the journey to town, bundled against the cold. The small church was aglow with candlelight, and the sounds of carols drifted through the air as they approached. Inside, the townspeople had gathered, their faces bright with holiday cheer. Lillian felt a pang as she entered, memories of previous Christmases with Samuel threatening to overwhelm her. But the warm greetings of neighbors and the simple beauty of the decorated church gradually eased her discomfort. Maria Martinez embraced her, whispering, "It is good to see you here, my friend. Samuel would want you to find joy again." The service was simple but moving, with scripture readings and familiar hymns. When the congregation sang Silent Night, Lillian found herself unable to join in, tears choking her voice. Without comment, Owen placed a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Afterward, they joined the community feast in the town hall. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by every family: roasted meats, preserves, pies, and cakes. It was a display of plenty that belied the hardship many of the settlers faced daily. As they ate and conversed with neighbors, Lillian noticed Owen watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. When their eyes met, he smiled softly, then turned to respond to a question from Jim Fitzgerald. The evening progressed pleasantly until Luther Harmon himself entered the hall with several of his men. A hush fell over the gathering as he moved through the crowd, tipping his hat to various townspeople with exaggerated courtesy. "Well, isn't this a lovely gathering?" Harmon said loudly. He was a tall man with a carefully groomed beard and expensive clothes that marked him as different from the hardworking settlers. "Christmas brings out the best in a community, doesn't it?" His gaze fell on Lillian and Owen, and his smile turned cold. "Mrs. Blackwell, a pleasure to see you in town. And Mr. Norwood, I believe? I've heard you've taken quite an interest in the widow's affairs." Owen stood slowly, his posture relaxed but alert. "Mr. Harmon," he acknowledged with a nod. "I'm surprised to see you joining the celebration. I wouldn't have taken you for a man who enjoys the company of those he tries to intimidate." The tension in the room was palpable. Harmon's men shifted, hands hovering near their weapons. You misunderstand my business methods, Mr. Norwood, Harmon replied, his tone falsely pleasant. I simply recognize opportunity where others see obstacles. Speaking of which, he turned to Lillian. I've come with a new offer, Mrs. Blackwell. In the spirit of the season, I'm prepared to increase my price for your land by 20%. A generous gesture. I think you'll agree. Lillian felt all eyes on her. This public confrontation was clearly designed to pressure her into compliance before the entire community. She straightened her spine. Mr. Harmon, I appreciate your persistence. But as I've told your men repeatedly, the ranch is not for sale. Not at any price. Harmon's smile disappeared. I admire your loyalty to your late husband's dream, Mrs. Blackwell. But dreams don't feed cattle or fix fences. Reality will set in eventually, especially when the railroad decides where to place its depot. That decision will determine which properties in this valley thrive and which wither. Is that a threat, Harmon? Owen asked quietly. Not at all, Harmon replied smoothly. Simply a prediction based on business experience. The railroad follows the path of least resistance and most profit. Judge Wilson stepped forward, his judicial authority lending weight to his presence. I believe we've had enough business talk for a Christmas celebration, Mr. Harmon. Perhaps you'd care to join in the festivities, or if not, allow the rest of us to continue in peace. Harmon smiled thinly. Of course, Judge. I wouldn't dream of disrupting the holiday spirit. He tipped his hat again. Merry Christmas to all. And Mrs. Blackwell, do consider my offer. It won't remain open indefinitely. As Harmon and his men departed, the tension in the room gradually dissipated, though the evening's joy had been dampened. Lillian found her appetite gone. We should head back, she murmured to Owen. I've had enough socializing for one night. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought as the wagon creaked through the snow-covered landscape. The moon illuminated the white fields, creating an ethereal beauty that contrasted sharply with the ugliness of Harmon's threats. He's growing desperate, Owen finally said as they approached the ranch. That public display wasn't about making you an offer. It was about showing everyone that he considers your land already his. And warning you to stay out of it, Lillian added. He sees you as the obstacle now, not me. Owen guided the horses into the yard. Let him think that. Better he focuses on me than pressures you directly. As they unhitched the horses and settled them for the night, Lillian found herself studying Owen in the lantern light, the careful way he handled the animals, the strength in his movements, the quiet determination in his face. In the months since he had arrived, he had become essential to the ranch's survival, but more than that, he had become essential to her in ways she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Owen, she said hesitantly as they walked toward the house, I want to thank you for accompanying me tonight. I couldn't have faced that alone. He paused at the porch steps, turning to her. In the moonlight, his expression was gentle. You're stronger than you know, Lillian, but I'm glad I was there. There was something in his voice, a warmth that went beyond mere friendship or professional courtesy. For a moment, they stood there, the cold night around them, something unspoken passing between them. Then Owen cleared his throat and stepped back. We should get inside. It's freezing out here. Lillian nodded, the moment broken but not forgotten. That night, as she lay in bed, Lillian found herself thinking not of Harmon's threats or the uncertain future of the ranch, but of the way Owen had looked at her in the moonlight, and the answering flutter she had felt in her heart, a sensation she thought had died with Samuel. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. January brought relentless snowstorms that isolated the ranch further. For nearly 2 weeks, they were unable to make the journey to town, subsisting on their stored supplies and focusing on keeping the cattle alive through the brutal weather. The forced isolation created a strange intimacy between Lillian and Owen. Confined largely to the house during the worst of the blizzards, They spent evenings reading aloud to each other from Lillian's small collection of books, playing checkers, and sharing stories of their lives before Colorado. One evening, as a particularly fierce storm howled outside, Owen spoke more openly about his past than he had before. "I wasn't always a drifter," he admitted, staring into the fire. "After Mexico, I went home to Pennsylvania, tried to settle back into normal life. Even got engaged to a local girl, daughter of my father's business partner." Lillian looked up from her mending, surprised by this revelation. "What happened?" Owen's expression grew distant. "The war changed me. I couldn't fit back into that world of social calls and business meetings. Couldn't explain to them what I'd seen, what I'd done." He shook his head. "One day, I just left. Wrote a letter breaking the engagement, said goodbye to my family, and headed west. Been moving ever since." "Until now," Lillian observed quietly. Their eyes met across the room. "Yes," he agreed. "Until now." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by a loud thump against the door. Owen was on his feet instantly, hand going to the pistol he kept at his waist. "Stay back," he warned, approaching the door cautiously. When he opened it, a gust of snow and wind blew in, along with a half-frozen figure who collapsed at his feet. "Good Lord!" Owen exclaimed, quickly closing the door against the storm. "Lillian, help me get him to the fire." Together they dragged the man to the hearth. As they removed his ice-encrusted coat and hat, Lillian recognized him. "It's Miguel Martinez, Maria's youngest boy." Miguel was barely conscious, his lips blue with cold. They worked quickly to warm him, wrapping him in blankets and placing his hands and feet near the fire, careful not to warm them too rapidly. When Miguel finally regained full consciousness, his eyes were wild with fear. "Mrs. Blackwell," he gasped, "Harmon's men, they came last night. Burned our barn, threatened my father. Said it was a warning to anyone who stood with you." Lillian exchanged an alarmed look with Owen. "Are your parents safe? Your sisters?" "Yes," Miguel nodded weakly. "Father sent them to stay with relatives in Pueblo. He stayed behind to protect the house. He sent me to warn you. Harmon told my father he's done waiting. He said after he deals with you, he'll come back for our land." Owen's expression hardened. "Miguel, you've done well to bring this warning. Rest now. When the storm breaks, I'll ride to your father's aid." That night, after Miguel had been settled in the spare room, Lillian found Owen checking his weapons at the kitchen table. "You can't possibly think of going out in this weather," she said, gesturing to the windows where snow still pelted against the glass. "Not tonight," he agreed. "But as soon as it's passable. Miguel's father is alone, vulnerable. And what about this ranch?" Lillian pressed. "If Harmon's men burned the Martinez barn, they won't hesitate to do the same here." Owen looked up at her, his eyes serious. "That's why I need you to go into town when I leave. Stay with Judge Wilson or at the boarding house." Lillian stiffened. "I will do no such thing. This is my home, and I won't abandon it." "Lillian, be reasonable." "No," she interrupted firmly. "Samuel died fighting for a cause he believed in. I won't dishonor his memory by running from a fight for the land he loved." Her voice softened slightly. "Besides, we agreed to stand together against Harmon. All of us. If I flee, what message does that send to the Martinezes and the others?" Owen studied her for a long moment, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he sighed. "You're as stubborn as your husband must have been." "More so," Lillian replied with a small smile. "He always said it was my defining quality." The tension broken, Owen returned her smile. "All right. But we need to prepare. Once the storm clears, Harmon will make his move." They spent the night planning, discussing strategies for defending the ranch and preparing messages to send to their neighbors when the weather permitted. Miguel, recovering his strength, joined them, offering information about Harmon's men and their tactics. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a crystalline landscape of pristine white. The sky was clear, the air bitingly cold but still. Owen saddled his horse, preparing to ride to the Martinez ranch while Miguel remained with Lillian. "I'll be back by nightfall," Owen promised as he mounted. "Keep the rifle close, and if you see or hear anything suspicious, don't hesitate to fire a warning shot." Lillian nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Be careful," she said, reaching up to adjust his scarf more securely around his neck. The gesture was intimate, domestic in a way that surprised them both. Owen caught her hand as she withdrew it, holding it briefly. "I will," he assured her. Then, almost impulsively, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Wait for me." Before she could respond, he had turned his horse and was galloping away, leaving Lillian standing in the snow, her heart racing with emotions she had long thought buried. The day passed slowly, with Lillian and Miguel taking turns watching the approaches to the ranch. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds were gathering again on the horizon, promising another storm before nightfall. "He should be back by now," Lillian said anxiously, staring out at the snow-covered path. "The Martinez place is only 4 hours' ride in good weather." Miguel looked concerned as well. "The snow is deep. It would slow him down. And if he encountered any of Harmon's men." The unfinished thought hung ominously in the air. As dusk approached and the first flakes of the new storm began to fall, Lillian made a decision. "I'm going to look for him. He may be injured or lost in the snow." Miguel protested, but Lillian was resolute. She bundled up warmly, took the rifle, and saddled her horse. "If we're not back by morning, ride to town and alert the judge," she instructed. The temperature was dropping rapidly as Lillian rode out, following the barely visible tracks Owen's horse had left earlier. The new snow was already beginning to cover them, increasing her sense of urgency. She had traveled perhaps 2 miles when she heard gunshots in the distance. Spurring her horse forward, she crested a small rise and saw a scene that made her blood run cold. Owen's horse, riderless, was being pursued by 2 mounted men. Of Owen himself, there was no sign. Lillian's instinct was to rush forward, but caution prevailed. She guided her horse into a small copse of trees, tying it securely before proceeding on foot, rifle in hand. The snow provided good cover for her approach as she followed the direction from which the shots had come. In a small clearing, she found evidence of a struggle-disturbed snow, more tracks, and then, to her horror, a trail of blood leading into a thicket of evergreens. Heart pounding, she followed it cautiously. "Owen," she called softly, fearful of attracting the attention of Harmon's men. A groan answered her, and pushing through the branches, she found him. Owen was propped against a tree trunk, his left side stained with blood, face pale with pain. "Lillian," he said weakly, disbelieving. "What are you doing here? It's not safe." She knelt beside him, quickly assessing his wound. "You're shot. We need to get you back to the ranch." "Harmon's men," he warned, trying to sit up straighter. "They ambushed me on the way back from the Martinez's. They'll be looking for me." "Then we need to move quickly," Lillian said, helping him to his feet. "Can you walk?" Owen nodded grimly, leaning heavily on her. "The Martinez's?" Lillian asked as they slowly made their way back to her horse. "Safe for now," Owen managed. "Harmon's men had already left when I arrived. Raphael was injured but alive. I helped him secure the house, then started back." He winced as they navigated through the deep snow. "They were waiting for me about a mile from our ranch. 2 of them. I managed to get a shot off before they hit me, then my horse bolted. I think I winged one of them before I fell." When they reached her horse, Lillian faced a new challenge. Owen was too weak to mount by himself, and she lacked the strength to boost him up. The snow was falling heavier now, and darkness was settling in. "We can't stay here," Owen said through gritted teeth. "They'll come back, and the cold will kill us before they do." Lillian scanned their surroundings, trying to think clearly despite her fear. There's an old trapper's cabin not far from here, she remembered suddenly. Samuel and I used it as a shelter once during a hunting trip. It's small, but it would give us protection from the weather and somewhere to treat your wound. With Owen providing directions from memory and Lillian leading the horse, they slowly made their way through the thickening snowfall. The cabin was indeed small and crude, little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was shelter from the storm and hidden from the main trail. Inside, Lillian quickly set about building a fire in the small stone hearth while Owen slumped against the wall, his breathing labored. Once the fire was going, she helped him remove his coat and shirt to examine his wound. The bullet had grazed his side, leaving a deep furrow through the flesh, but thankfully not lodging in his body. Using water from her canteen and strips torn from her petticoat, Lillian cleaned and bound the wound as best she could. "You're quite skilled at this," Owen observed, watching her work. "When you live as far from town as we do, you learn to handle injuries," she replied, securing the bandage. "Samuel once came home with a foot nearly crushed by a fallen log. We were 3 days from the nearest doctor. I had to tend it myself." The mention of Samuel brought a momentary awkwardness between them, a reminder of the ghost that still stood between them. "He would be proud of you," Owen said quietly, "of how you've fought for this land." Lillian sat back on her heels, looking at him directly. "What about you, Owen? Are you fighting for the land, or is there another reason you've stayed?" The question had been building within her for months, and now, in this isolated cabin with the storm raging outside, it finally found voice. Owen held her gaze steadily. "I stayed for the land at first," he admitted. "For the principle of it. But now—" He reached out, his hand finding hers. "Now I'm fighting for you, Lillian. Only you." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Lillian felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were not tears of grief or fear. They were tears of recognition of finding something she had thought lost forever. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Samuel would want you to be happy," Owen said gently. "To live fully, not just survive." His hand tightened on hers. "I'm not asking for promises, Lillian. Just a chance. When this is over, when Harmon is no longer a threat, we can take time to see what might grow between us." Lillian looked at their joined hands, then back to his face, earnest, open, waiting patiently for her response. In that moment, she realized that her heart had already begun to heal, to make room for this man who had fought beside her, who understood her grief because he carried his own, who saw her strength rather than her vulnerability. "Yes," she said simply. "When this is over, we'll see what grows." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Despite his injury, despite their precarious situation, there was joy in that small cabin, a promise of possibilities that neither had dared hope for. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside, a different kind of weather was changing, the winter of grief giving way to the first tentative signs of spring. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Owen's fever had risen during the night, and Lillian knew they needed to reach the ranch soon for proper medical care. Helping him onto her horse, she began the slow journey home, alert for any sign of Harmon's men. They arrived at the ranch to find Miguel anxiously waiting, rifle in hand. With his help, they got Owen settled in Lillian's bed, his wound properly cleaned and bandaged with supplies from her medicine chest. "What now?" Miguel asked as they sat at the kitchen table, watching the road for any approach. "Now we end this," Lillian said with newfound determination. "Harmon nearly killed Owen. He burned your family's barn. He's terrorized everyone in this valley long enough." That afternoon, Judge Wilson arrived unexpectedly with Sheriff Davenport and 3 deputies. Miguel had apparently slipped away while Lillian was tending to Owen and had ridden to town for help. "Mrs. Blackwell," the judge greeted her, Young Miguel here has told us quite a tale. Is Mr. Norwood able to speak? We need his statement about the attack. While Owen recounted the ambush to the sheriff, Judge Wilson explained to Lillian that complaints against Harmon had finally reached the territorial governor. There's an investigation underway into his business practices, particularly regarding the railroad contracts. But this attack on Mr. Norwood, that's attempted murder. We can arrest him now, today. True to the judge's word, by evening Luther Harmon was in custody, along with the two men who had ambushed Owen. The evidence against them was overwhelming, with Miguel's testimony about the barn burning and Owen's identification of his attackers. It's really over? Lillian asked the sheriff as he prepared to depart. Harmon will stand trial in Denver, Sheriff Davenport confirmed. And with the governor's interest in the case, I doubt he'll return to these parts, regardless of the verdict. That night, with the immediate danger past, Lillian sat beside Owen's bed, watching him sleep. The events of the past few days had clarified something within her life was precious and fleeting, and love, when found, should be embraced. Spring arrived gradually, thawing the land and bringing new growth to the valley. The railroad decided to place its depot at Cedar Ridge rather than on Harmon's property, a decision influenced by Judge Wilson's intervention and the testimony of the local ranchers about the water rights and land usage. Owen's recovery was slow but steady. By April, he was back to his duties on the ranch, though Lillian insisted he take care with his still healing wound. Their relationship had evolved during his convalescence, moving from tentative friendship to deeper affection, though both were careful to give the other space when memories of the past surfaced. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in vibrant hues, Owen turned to Lillian with an earnest expression. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what comes next." He took her hand in his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "The ranch is secure now. The cattle are thriving. You don't really need a hired hand anymore." Lillian felt a flutter of alarm. "Are you planning to leave?" "No," he said quickly. "That is, not unless you want me to." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that I love you, Lillian. I think I have since that first day when you stood so bravely, facing your grief and Harmon's threats with equal determination." Lillian's heart swelled with emotion. She had known this conversation was coming, had prepared herself for it, yet the reality of hearing those words still overwhelmed her. "I know Samuel will always have a place in your heart," Owen continued. "I would never ask you to forget him or what you shared. But I believe there's room in a heart for more than one love." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring. "I'm asking if there's room in your heart for me, not as your ranch hand, but as your husband." Tears filled Lillian's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at this man who had fought for her, who had brought her back to life when she thought her heart had died with Samuel. "There's more than room," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "There's a home for you there, Owen. Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and gathered her into his arms, Lillian felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming full circle. She had lost one good man to war, but found another who had fought a different kind of battle for her land, for her future, and ultimately, for her heart. Their wedding took place in the small church in Cedar Ridge on a bright June morning, attended by their neighbors and friends. Maria Martinez wept openly, declaring it a miracle of new beginnings. Judge Wilson gave the bride away, and even gruff Jim Fitzgerald admitted to having something in his eye during the exchange of vows. As they drove back to the ranch that afternoon, now husband and wife, Lillian looked out at the land that had seen so much hardship and triumph. The cattle grazed peacefully on the green spring grass, the house stood solid against the backdrop of distant mountains, and beside her sat a man who had once promised to fight for her, and who now promised to love her for all his days. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Lillian smiled, squeezing his hand. I'm thinking that life takes us on unexpected journeys. That grief can give way to joy. That endings can become beginnings. Owen brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. And that some battles are worth fighting, he added, especially the ones fought for love. As they approached the ranch, their ranch now, their home, their future, Lillian felt Samuel's memory like a gentle blessing rather than a haunting presence. She would always honor what they had shared, the foundation they had built together. But now, with Owen, she would continue the story, adding new chapters filled with love, laughter, and the quiet strength they had found in each other. And in the years to come, as their family grew and the ranch prospered, Lillian would often recall that moment when a weary cowboy had looked at a grieving widow and said, "Then let me fight for you now," words that had changed the course of her life and opened her heart to love once more.